This is Defense Domain, your source for strategic insight on global security, defense systems, and geopolitical risk. This is the weekly strategic brief. Week 14 covers the period from April 4 to April 10, 2026. This week marks a transition from rapid escalation to a fragile and conditional stabilization phase. A limited ceasefire between the United States and Iran has slowed escalation. However, the absence of unified enforcement has prevented true de-escalation. Operations continue across Lebanon and the Gulf. This indicates fragmentation into parallel conflict theaters rather than convergence. From a strategic perspective, energy systems have become the central battle space. Petrochemical facilities, pipelines, and maritime routes are now primary targets. This reflects a shift towards systemic economic coercion. At the same time, Iran has adopted a controlled access model in the Strait of Hormuz. This transforms a global choke point into a managed leverage instrument. At the systemic level, fractures in alliance structures are becoming visible. Tensions within NATO are increasing. Global governance mechanisms are weakening. Unilateral and coalition-based enforcement models are replacing coordinated frameworks. Hybrid threats and infrastructure targeting are expanding the conflict into multiple domains. Turning to the operational assessment of the Iran war. The conflict has now exceeded 40 days. It has involved more than 10 theaters and directly affected over 20 countries. Missile activity has exceeded 120 waves. Maritime disruption remains significant, with dozens of vessels attacked and hundreds rerouted. From a structural perspective, the conflict has moved through multiple phases. It began with decapitation strikes. It expanded through proxy activation and maritime disruption. It evolved into sustained energy targeting. It escalated into long-range strikes with nuclear-adjacent risk. It then transitioned into systemic multi-domain warfare. Now, it has entered a controlled escalation phase under a fragile ceasefire. The operational environment is now defined by sustained multi-domain pressure. The maritime domain has become a central battle space. Continuous vessel attacks and controlled transit regimes confirm persistent contestation. Proxy warfare has evolved into a constant operational layer. Iran-aligned groups continue to target U.S. bases and regional assets. Energy systems remain the center of gravity. Targeting production and export infrastructure is driving economic disruption. Despite the ceasefire, operational tempo remains high. Missile and drone activity continues across multiple fronts. Geographic spillover is expanding. Incidents near Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean increase escalation complexity. Turning to air domain dynamics. The downing of U.S. aircraft has challenged assumptions of air superiority. Operations in contested airspace have introduced significant friction. Search and rescue missions have exposed vulnerabilities in personnel recovery. At the same time, the ceasefire has created fragmented conflict tracks. Different actors interpret the agreement differently. While Hezbollah has reduced activity, Israel continues operations in Lebanon. This divergence undermines mediation efforts and increases escalation risk. In Lebanon, Israeli airstrikes have expanded geographically. Targets include Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and southern regions. Strikes in mixed civilian areas are increasing humanitarian pressure. They are also deepening internal fragmentation. In the Gulf, targeting has shifted toward command structures. The killing of a senior Iranian intelligence official reflects this trend. Iran has also demonstrated the ability to strike distributed U.S. assets. These attacks focus on satellite systems and operational enablers. This indicates a shift toward targeting command and intelligence nodes. From a signaling perspective, escalation remains controlled but active. Iran has rejected time-bound ceasefire proposals. The United States has maintained calibrated strikes. This creates a dual-track dynamic of pressure and negotiation. Turning to Turkey, an attack near the Israeli consulate in Istanbul highlights urban spillover risks. This demonstrates how local actors exploit broader geopolitical tensions. Internal security risks are increasing even in non-belligerent states. In South Asia, China is mediating talks between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This reflects efforts to contain regional instability. In the Ukraine and Russia theater, a temporary Easter ceasefire was observed. However, this does not indicate a strategic shift. It reflects humanitarian signaling rather than progress toward resolution. From a regional conflict perspective, fragmentation is now the defining characteristic. Parallel conflict tracks and expanding spillover risks are shaping the environment. Ceasefires are functioning as temporary pauses rather than resolution mechanisms. Turning to energy and maritime security, the Strait of Hormuz has shifted from disruption to controlled access. Transit is now conditional. This allows Iran to maintain leverage without enforcing a full blockade. Across the Gulf, energy infrastructure targeting has expanded. Facilities in multiple countries are being degraded. This reflects a shift toward economic warfare. At the same time, export routes are being targeted. The strike on Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline illustrates this trend. Backup systems are now part of the battle space. This expands the scope of energy denial strategies. Globally, maritime traffic remains reduced. Shipping operates under uncertainty. Permit-based navigation has created a politically filtered environment. In the Ukraine-Russia theater, energy export infrastructure is being systematically targeted. Strikes on storage and pipeline systems are degrading export capacity. In the Black Sea, operations now combine military and economic objectives. Naval assets and offshore energy infrastructure are both targeted. This reflects integrated multi-domain warfare. In Europe, sanctions enforcement is becoming militarized. Naval escorts and monitoring operations are increasing. This raises the risk of confrontation in commercial maritime zones. From an energy perspective, logistics networks are now a central battle space. Turning to hybrid threats, cyber operations targeting industrial control systems are increasing. These attacks introduce physical risks to infrastructure. Subsea infrastructure is also emerging as a strategic vulnerability. Monitoring of undersea assets highlights the risk to energy and communication networks. Hybrid threats are shifting from digital disruption to physical impact. This expands the battle space into civilian systems. Turning to defense technology and industry, Germany is refining military mobility rules. This reflects preparation for rapid force expansion. Ukraine is developing low-cost air defense solutions. This challenges the economics of missile interception. Gulf states are exploring interceptor drones. This reflects the need for scalable counter-drone systems. North Korea is testing cluster warheads and electronic warfare systems. This indicates adaptation to asymmetric conflict models. Defense industrial sustainability is becoming a critical strategic factor. Innovation is decentralizing production. At the same time, industrial bottlenecks remain a vulnerability. Turning to global power competition, the Iran war is straining the transatlantic alliance. Differences between the United States and Europe are becoming more visible. This raises questions about alliance cohesion. Global governance mechanisms are weakening. The failure to establish a maritime security framework highlights divisions. Maritime security is increasingly shaped by unilateral actions. At the same time, Russia and Iran are increasing operational coordination. This includes intelligence sharing and cyber cooperation. Economic tools are also expanding. The United States is linking trade access to security alignment. China is applying dual-track pressure on Taiwan. Military presence is combined with political engagement. Middle powers are becoming more active. Cooperation between Ukraine and Turkey reflects this trend. From a systemic perspective, global order is becoming more decentralized. Turning to future conflict dynamics, a measles outbreak in Bangladesh highlights public health vulnerabilities. Strikes near nuclear infrastructure in Iran introduce radiological risks. These dynamics expand conflict beyond traditional military domains. They challenge societal resilience. From a cross-field perspective, several structural signals are emerging. Ceasefire mechanisms are fragmented. Maritime choke points are being used as leverage systems. Energy warfare is expanding into systemic layers. Civilian infrastructure domains are increasingly militarized. Looking ahead to next week, ceasefire talks between the United States and Iran are expected to begin. Iran may enforce transit limits in the Strait of Hormuz. Israel may initiate discussions with Lebanon. NATO consultations are expected to intensify. The outcome of the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire will be closely monitored. This was the Defense Domain Weekly Strategic Brief. For more in-depth analysis, visit defensedomain.com. Stay informed. Stay strategic.